everybody. My name is Angie Murenga. You're watching Just Angie, and today I have a guest and a topic that's very close to my heart. Solo, welcome to Just Angie.
Asante. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to having my conversation because I'm about to share my secrets. And I guess the first thing is that I had said I would never buy land. Yeah, I'd really resigned myself to that fact. Unless somebody gave it to me, which was probably my parents, you know, or I inherited it. I was like, I'm not going to that whole thing of buying land, simply because of the horror stories I'd heard. The horror stories were many. So it's so crazy that I had a healthy fear of not buying land until I met you.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you. That's very encouraging thing to hear. We always consider it a privilege when people trust us with that process, and I totally understand where you're coming from.
Have you met people like me before, as you've engaged in the industry, who are like me? I wasn't going to go do this thing.
Yeah, I'd say probably half of all the people we've sold land to felt that way. They were like, no way. Yeah, and for good reason. I mean.
There's some serious horror stories.
Yeah, I know I shared it with you before. 60% of our customers have been conned before.
Had been conned before?
Yes.
Thank God I'm not in the 60%. But that is so sad. And how to move on after being conned? Because you know, land is not, it's not like you're buying, this is a substantial amount of money that you probably saved up, or maybe it was a bonus or something. It's a substantial amount of money. It's not cheap. So how do they even get over it?
I don't know. You know, thankfully, I haven't been conned. Well, in Kenya, I've been conned before. Really? It's happened twice before in property transactions, but ironically, both times were in the US.
Really? Yeah. Even there are those kind of people. For conning guys or property transactions, we think they wouldn't con people.
It's universal.
Yeah, but how did you start this solo? Because I remember meeting you a couple of years back, and you went into doing land. But I think first of all, you're an extremely safe person to buy land from. But let's start with how it all started.
Wow. Well, as Steve Jobs is famous for talking about connecting the dots.
Backwards.
Yes. You know, I'd say it really started in 2004. I was a college dropout. I had to drop out of college. My folks had sacrificed so much to take me to school in the US, and you know, finances became an issue after a while. So I dropped out, and in that, you know, horrifying, emotionally turbulent time, you know, just trying to find my bearings and figure out what I was going to do with my life, I stumbled upon an infomercial. It's people who find infomercials in the States. So there's actually statistics that you know, suggest that if you acted on an infomercial, chances are you were depressed or low, you were not sleeping, and the infomercials start playing at around 11:30 in the evening. To target, you know, desperate people. Really? Yeah, it's crazy. So you know, someone told me that after the fact, but you know, I stumbled upon an infomercial that was advertising a course on real estate investment and how you could buy and sell property in the US with no money down, no credit, and no experience beforehand. And that piqued my interest because I was in the middle of trying to survive, pay rent, buy food, and hopefully at some point get back to school. And so, you know, I took a chance. I spent money on a credit card I could not afford to service, and bought this course on buying real estate with no money down. And I consumed it very quickly, and I got busy about trying to identify what makes a good real estate deal in the little city I was staying at the time, which was Savannah, Georgia, where I went to school. And you know, that's kind of where it started. And obviously I didn't have any money to actually buy anything, but I learned how to identify a good deal and negotiate with the property owner. That was probably the hardest part as an illegal immigrant with a weird accent.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah, strange accent, young, you know, early mid-20s, trying to convince, you know, in many cases, you know, white Americans, many of whom were my parents' age, to sell me their properties for pennies on the dollar for one reason or the other. And, you know, didn't have any success in Georgia, so I moved up to North Carolina, where where I lived for 3 years, and there I managed to do a few deals. So I'd convinced someone to sign a sale agreement. They'd give me 30 days to raise the money, as long as I gave them a small deposit. In the States, you know, a deposit is anything that is deemed of value by the seller. So, you know, it doesn't have to be cash. The value. Yes, so there's the standard ranges, 10%, 20%, whatever. But if you didn't have it, you could negotiate with the property owner. Wow. And I think the most at the time I was doing $1 deposits, which I could scrounge up.
$1 deposits.
The dollar. I mean, if the seller was willing to accept it, that was legally binding. In some cases, I heard of people who would give their watch as a deposit. I heard of a case where someone liked the buyer's shoes or pair of shoes, so he took one pair as a deposit. So in the States, the legal, you know, system works a bit different, and it varies from state to state. But that's how I kind of got started, and then I would find people who actually had money to close out on the deal, and I would sign over my contract to them. They call it assignment of contract. So I would assign my buyer's rights
to them,
to the person who actually had money, and that was really the start of the journey. And I did that until 2008 when the market crashed in the US.
Wow!
Because then there was tons of properties to buy because everything was depressed, but you couldn't find qualified buyers because the credit market had also crashed. So I ended up doing sales for my last 2 years before I came back home in 2009. And then fast forward 2011, I was in church. At the time, I was going to Mavuno.
Mavuno, yeah, I remember it was Mavuno.
Yeah, and
they were at Bellevue at that time.
Yes, Bellevue, and Pastor M was doing a thing called Financial Fitness.
He's written a book, hasn't he?
Yes,
I think he's written a book.
Yeah, he has, and that was an interesting sermon series. You know, finances always kind of catch people's attention.
Yes,
and he had this. Habit of bringing a guest speaker with him each Sunday to tackle some aspect of his sermon.
Financial fitness, okay.
And there's one particular Sunday, he had this lady called Rose Muniva Muyu.
I remember her from Nairobi Chapel.
Right.
She saved that on my phone as land something or something, because she was really into land. I remember
she is, yeah. She's like the smiliest human being.
Yes, very bubbly.
I've ever met. And she shared this incredibly, you know, difficult to believe story about how I think at the time she hadn't earned any more than 40,000 shillings her whole life, and yet she was worth so much in property. Yes. Plots here, there, everywhere. I went to see some of them. Yeah. I could not believe it. And so, you know, I quickly looked for her number after the sermon. I called her and I said, would you mentor me? You know, I've never bought property in Kenya. I'm terrified of getting conned. Doing due diligence is a nightmare. There's no transparency. You seem to know kind of how to navigate.
Yes, what are you doing?
Please, you know, can you help a brother out? And she surprisingly said yes.
Really?
Yeah.
And you know, it's amazing idea. I was just thinking of how the impact that Pastor Murithi Wanjau, if you're out there, Pastor M, has had an impact on so many of us, you know. I was thinking even Rich, even for up, you know, all the people who have been around the Mavuno space, that something happened in that space that even me, I mean, I'm sitting here, I quit my job to go into ministry there, and he was part of my training. He led me to Christ, you know.
I think that's where we first met.
That's where we first met, yeah. So it's amazing how there's so much connection there, because nobody would think going to church would provide a solution.
Right.
But I guess not just going to any church, you need to be going to Mavuno church, you know. Mavuno, let me tell you, the impact was crazy. There's once I remember they did in Mizizi, there's week 4 where you do dying to self. And so we came to church and then guys walked in with 2 coffins, black suits, shades, and they're carrying 2 coffins. The drummer was excess, then they put them at the front. Then we had to file past the coffins, and then you saw yourself inside the coffin. Let me tell you, redefining moments of life and what it means. And we were back to, you went to church on a Sunday. I think that's really encouraging, and I like that. I like the uniqueness of that story, that you went to church and there was Pastor M with his financial literacy sermon, and he's got Rose to expound on it. And I think for me, one of the things that that I get from your story is quick action. Because a lot of people will say, they'll see something, they'll think about it, let's say it's even that church experience, then you sort of talk yourself out of it. You talk yourself out of, now I would call Rose, she's not going to have time for me. This is not really the kind of story, you know, maybe this is not, our stories are not, you just work yourself into a frenzy and talk yourself out of it. So I love even the fact that you acted and you went and you called her and there was positive action and she said yes. So we'll hold it up for there. That was me and Solo just started the conversation about buying land, Goshen acquisitions, and you should really, if you're looking to buy land, please buy land from Solo. It is safe, it is amazing, you'll be completely trustworthy, but we want to understand how this all began. So God bless you and look forward to part 2. See you next Thursday. Bye.